Najee Harris is entering the final year of his contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's next with today's guest here on the Bleav in Steelers show. Welcome in. My name is Mark Bergin. Before we introduce today's guest on Bleav in Steelers, we have two presenting sponsors. The first, BetOnline.ag. They've been with us since day one. If you want to bet on any of the NBA or NHL action, BetOnline.ag is the place to do it. You can see it on your screen right now, betonline.ag. They've got scores, player props, odds, pretty much every single sport. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Also, today's presenting sponsor of Bleav in Steelers is Melin Hats. Really, really cool hat sponsor we have here on Bleav in Steelers now. You can wear it at the beach. You can wear it outside. You can wear your hat on the golf course. Melin Hats, if they fit my head, they'll fit on yours as well. Really, really cool stuff here. And if you use our promo code melin.com/Steelers, you can get 30% off your order. Again, melin.com/Steelers. Welcome into Bleav in Steelers. My name is Mark Bergin. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest. He is the host of Locked On Steelers. He also covers Pitt athletics for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Welcome in, Chris Carter. Chris, how are you, my friend?
Doing great, Mark. How you been?
Doing well. Got to pay the bills always right off the top. Very, very excited to start talking with you about the Steelers offseason now that the draft is behind us. And I want to get right into it with Najee Harris and his future with the team. I want to get to first kind of what did you make of the news of the Steelers declining his fifth-year option for the 2025 season?
I thought it was a mistake simply because even if you're not a big believer in Najee, $6.7 million was nothing for a running back of his caliber. Again, he's the only running back in the last 3 seasons to get 1,000 yards in each of those seasons. And that's particularly because he's always healthy. He's played 51 and 51 regular season games and in both playoff games. He's been available. I think that anyone that looks at his situation can also note that he hasn't had good offensive lines to work with outside of maybe the last 9 games of this past season. And that was even a semi-decent offensive line with a rookie kind of, adding the extra push there. He's had a not good offensive coordinator situation. He's had not good quarterback play. And yet he's still been decent for the Steelers. And I know some people out there are like, well, you don't take a running back in the first round. This is a terrible pick. You can't do this. Da, da, da. Well, guess what? He's delivering. And if you look at and shout out to Dale Lawley, who works for Steelers.com, he pointed out, if you look at all the players that got drafted in his year, he has the most yards from scrimmage. And that includes guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamar Chase. The only player he has less touchdowns than from that year is Jamar Chase. Sure, he has not played like a superstar running back, but he also has been put in situations to really be that. And I think that for $6.7 million, which would have been the 12th highest paid running back going into next season, that seemed like a no-brainer. Now you're in a situation where, with the investments you've made in the offensive line, with the changes you've made in offensive coordinator, with the veteran quarterback that you brought in to lead your offense, you're putting him in a better situation to succeed this year, and that's great. But what happens, Mark, if he blows up and this is a 13, 14, 1,500-yard season for him on the ground, and then all of a sudden you're looking at wait a second, now he's going to be more expensive than $6.7 million. And if he's bad, he's bad. Then if you're banking on him being a not good running back this year, so be it. And if that turns out that way, that's fine. But I just think this was not a problem to put in your bank for the future that you could have just easily added. If they sign him to that contract, Mark, they have $87 million left in cap space for next season. It just seemed like a no-brainer. And now it's a question that seems like they didn't have to force upon themselves. But Omar Khan's made a lot of great moves. So maybe he's got something in the works that we can't see right now. We got to give him that space to do his work.
Psychologically, I want to see what that does to him as a player entering a contract season now, because if he's smart, he'll wait till the offseason to negotiate to see potentially what he can get on an open market. What I want to ask you, though, is this his final year in a Pittsburgh Steelers uniform?
It's a good question. I don't know. Because here's the other thing I think about that is with the run game that they're trying to establish, he's perfect for that. He's physical. He's you would want him to be there here for the next 2 to 3 years, because that's the other thing is that now with Jaylen Warren, you're not grinding him out. You're not making him run 400 times a season and asking him to do all of that. If you go back to see what Arthur Smith did with Derrick Henry in the 2 years that he had him in Tennessee. Derrick Henry ran the ball like 80% of the time. Like the guys who were secondary to him, Deion Lewis, and there was another guy there. All of those guys were, I think Jeremy McNichols was the other running back. Both of those guys in those 2 seasons, they had less than 100 carries. Jaylen Warren's getting more than is probably going to get closer to like 140 and to give them a more even split. But I think part of that is the plan to make it so that Najee Harris can last longer and doesn't get worn down so quickly, because them as a 1-2 punch can be very dynamic and can be something to center this offense around while you have a really good offensive line, a young developing offensive line, Russell Wilson giving you better quarterback play. And then you still have what you have in Pat Freiermuth, George Pickens. And I think that there still might add another option at wide receiver. But, I think that there's a lot of potential there. So again, just for me, I think that Najee Harris still has a future with the Steelers, but I think a lot of it depends on him continuing to be healthy like he has been his entire career this season and showing that he can excel in this offense. If he blows up this year, I think they try to lock him in. Granted, I think it will be for more money than what they could have had him at with his 5th-year option.
Again, I think about it from the standpoint of a player entering a contract season to where he's going to want to get the bag. And to me, that would be a good problem if the Steelers run into that. But again, they could end up paying more on the back end to where if they give him that 5th-year option now, maybe Najee isn't quite as hungry with his on-field performance. I think there's something to the psychology of this move. Maybe. At the same time, too, you mentioned the struggles of the offensive line. Let me add some fuel to your fire, because I would have made this move. This is a very shrewd decision by Omar Khan. I would have made the same move. But you also didn't mention the fact that Matt Canada has been his offensive coordinator.
Oh, I said his coordinator's been bad.
Yeah. So listen, let's not pretend that hasn't been part of the struggles. Yes, you want to see the yards per carry higher. He's a chain mover. He's not a home run hitter. He's not that style of running back. And I am very excited to see what he can do with what should be a much improved offensive line in the 2024 season and now entering a contract season. But let's not shortchange too that like his play callers have not been great the last several seasons. And I'm trying to be a little bit polite here.
No, agreed. I mean, they've not been in a situation to have the run game be there. And again, like go back and look at most of the runs that Najee Harris, he's getting contact behind the line. He's dealing with things there. And when that happens more often than not, when it happens at the rate that it does to Najee Harris, people talk about his vision and, oh, he misses holes. You miss holes when you're expecting a defender in your hip pocket a second after you get the ball. Like people think about, well, Le'Veon Bell, he had great vision. Le'Veon Bell also had the space to have great vision. Like everyone talk about, oh, how he's so great at hesitating behind the line and then picking his hole. You know why he could hesitate behind the line? Because
who did he have, Chris?
Exactly. Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, Ramon Foster. Those guys were kicking butt up the middle. And then you even had decent tackle play then. So if I'm the Steelers, I'm looking at this realistically. And I think that's why the Steelers, they have more faith in Najee Harris than I think the public does, even though they haven't given him this 5th-year option. I also wonder if this is more so, you could talk about the mental aspect as far as putting a chip on his shoulder. Let me tell you, as a person who interviews Najee Harris, that man has a chip on his shoulder every day. Like he's looking to disprove anything's ever said about him. He is working very hard all the time. But I think the other aspect of this is that the Steelers are looking at this, and it might not be a mental aspect for the players. It might be just an approach aspect for the front office. Omar Khan has spent 20 years studying under Kevin Colbert the tendencies of the NFL, and maybe he's just realizing, you know what? Running back just ain't valued like everyone else. I mean, like it used to be. And everyone else in the NFL isn't going to pay him that kind of money. So maybe it won't be that hard for the Steelers to keep him next year without the 5th-year option. So maybe this is just a cold, hard fact calculation or numbers calculation from Omar Khan. That was his specialty. But I also, as we could see, him and Andy Wilder are putting together some pretty good draft boards, and I think Steelers fans have been very happy about these 2 first draft classes. Maybe Omar Khan, it's his approach in how he values this position more so than how he values Najee Harris.
Positional value is what Omar Khan specializes in, Chris, and we'll talk plenty about that too, talking about this draft class. But I want to stay on the offensive side of the ball and at the skill position players. I still think there's a move to be made at the receiver position. And I almost liken it to where a year ago, The Steelers signed Quan Alexander in late July, and he was a key contributor to the defense, right? It was, okay, what are they doing inside linebacker? But at the receiver position, you've got Pickens. I know Roman Wilson's coming from the draft, and he's going to compete in the slot position with Calvin Austin III. A lot of Steelers fans saying, well, Tyler Boyd to Tennessee. What the heck? Tyler Boyd's a slot. So that's a position that you don't need. To me, you need someone to complement Pickens. Is there a move out there with the NFC West? I've heard rumblings. Like, I think that there's still something in the mix here. Call me crazy. What say you, Christopher Carter?
I think you put out a good point about when they signed Quan Alexander. The Steelers are just simply testing the waters. Like we all were like, including myself, were like, when Bryant McFadden was like, there's something coming, everyone was like, whoa, wait a second. Brian McFadden might know something here. But then he backed off and deleted the tweet. He's like, okay, I just saying that there's something interesting down the line. It's not imminent. But I do think that there's a lot of reasons to say, hey, the Steelers, they're in a position to be patient. They have all these rookies. They have all these new players. Let's just see them in the spring. You're going to be able to see rookie camp. You're going to be able to see OTAs. You're going to be able to see mini camp. And with those, you'll get a sense of how ready everyone is for the NFL. You'll get to see guys like Beanie Bishop, an undrafted free agent out of West Virginia. What if Beanie Bishop just looks great in the spring practices, and then in training camp he lights it up, and then you're like, you know what? That's the starting slot corner. You don't need to go get a starting slot corner. That's fine. Then that's a need that's not on your radar as much when you're trying to make these decisions. So instead of locking yourself into going and getting a number 2 wide receiver, like let's say Roman Wilson goes out, everyone's thinking, oh, he's a slot guy because of his size. What if he goes out and he's just lighting it up in camp and he's giving it to Joey Porter Jr. on the outside? Like what if he's just being that good? I'm not saying that he will be. Then all of a sudden you change your calculus. Well, wait a minute. Instead of going and having to trade for Cortland Sutton, now you can just go get a Hunter Renfrow for very little, for not giving up any draft picks. I think that's what the Steelers are doing. They're waiting to see what happens there, and not just on the talent front, but also on the injury front. Because what happens if a key player goes down and now you need to go, let's say Joey Porter Jr. goes down, and now all of a sudden you need to go get Stephon Gilmore or Xavier Howard because you just need somebody to play cornerback right now. All those things taken into account. Or another team, let's say another team loses their starting offensive tackle, and if you're the Steelers, you're like, well, we have this guy who's been a 3-year starter in Dan Moore Jr., who's not really too big on us, but you kind of need him right now. And then all of a sudden you either get a playmaker wide receiver or you get like a mid-round draft pick for him. That's where I think the Steelers, they're happy with where they are. They've accomplished a lot of their goals in free agency and the draft. Sure, they could use another corner and another receiver, but there's no reason to commit themselves to a path that locks them into something that maybe they won't need once they see these guys in the spring practices and then maybe even again in the summer practices at Latrobe.
I want to throw out a few names here, and I want to point something out about the style of receiver Arthur Smith typically coaches in his career. Per DK Metcalf, maybe. Tyler Lockett, I say no, just given the size, and I'll get to that in a second. The reason why Metcalf and Lockett are on my list, though, is you have a little bit of a receiver glut with the Seahawks, with Jackson Smith and Najee out of Ohio State as well. So you've got a pretty good trio there in Seattle. Cortland Sutton, maybe, good size. Brandon Ayuk's been the guy who's been rumored. I think that the 49ers wanted way too much for him in advance of the draft. So I don't know how truthful those rumors are. Those are some of the names out there. But what I would tell a listener or viewer is this. Go look at the style of receiver Arthur Smith has coached in the past. They're all 6'2 plus. Yeah. So I see the pick of Roman Wilson. It's like, okay, they'll have to figure out how to get him the ball in space because he's not a big guy. But there's also a want to with Roman Wilson when it comes to his blocking ability on the outside that really, really excites me as well. So those are the things that I think about when it comes to the standpoint of what the Steelers are doing when it comes to the receiver position. Again, I still think that there's a move to be made, but also with the pick of Wilson, and I'll end here, Chris, I'll pass this back to you.
Sure.
Whenever the Steelers draft a receiver, it's like, putting the Superman cape on. I don't know what it is about putting the black and gold on. We see Chase Claypool struggle to get signed. He's finally with the Bills. As a rookie, he had 11 touchdowns. He had 4 touchdowns in a game. You put that Steelers uniform on as a receiver, I don't know what it does, but it gives receivers like a superpower. I swear.
Yeah, listen, the Steelers have been very good at drafting receivers over the years, and I think they've shown an ability to scout there. But also, let's not mistake the reality that they had a really good quarterback for some time, and that made it easier for receivers to integrate into the NFL. Ben Roethlisberger certainly had his flaws, but when Mike Wallace came into the league, Mike Wallace didn't have to become a super route runner. All Ben Roethlisberger had to do was just look at him and say, "Yeah, go ball," and touchdowns would appear. And listen, there were other guys that didn't necessarily need Ben Roethlisberger. Emmanuel Sanders was a heck of a player without him. Antonio Brown is the best receiver of the last decade. So they did that. But the Steelers have found a way to find answers at wide receiver. And maybe Roman Wilson's another example of that. Deontay Johnson developed into a number one wide receiver who, by all the metrics and advanced metrics and everything that determines separation, he had the best separation numbers in the NFL, out of the last 2 seasons. And so, that was a guy they picked in the 3rd round who a lot of people overlooked out of a small school in Toledo. So I look at that and I think, you know what, Roman Wilson, I liked Roman Wilson's tape. I thought Roman Wilson was one of my sleeper picks that could be a really good 2nd round pick, and they got him in the 3rd round. So to me, I wouldn't put it past them to find the answer there. You also have a guy like Calvin Austin that, who knows, maybe he figures it out. I don't think Calvin Austin's been bad. I think he's undersized and needs to fit into an offense that makes sense. And that's what's going to be a lot on Arthur Smith too, is putting the Steelers in advantageous situations to give so these guys better spots to make bigger plays.
Absolutely. Chris, I love what the Steelers did in the draft. So people listening to this or watch this, take what I'm about to say and preface it with that, because they get their tackle of the future a year before they absolutely need a tackle when Dan Moore Jr.'s contract is up. And say what you want about Dan Moore Jr., his contract's been very favorable, and he's been a starter the last several seasons. Yes, maybe it's been below average. It's a very team-friendly deal. So you can bring Troy Fautanu along, and then you have the 5th-year option control of a tackle versus an interior lineman like Zach Frazier. Tackle is going to cost you more money in the long run. So it's a savvy move for positional value. Again, I credit Omar Khan in his moves there. But was there someone at 20 that you thought, man, it would be really nice if the Steelers had picked that player instead of Fautanu at 20?
Fautanu was a great pick on my board. In fact, let me go back to my big board real quick here. While
you pull that up, Chris, the 2 guys that were on my list on the board still at 20, Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. We saw him at the combine. Just his fluidity. There are some people that think he's even better than Malik Neighbors. I'm not one of them, but a great receiver, 17 touchdowns. He knows how to take it the distance. And then Quinyon Mitchell, the corner out of Toledo. Those were the 2 that were on my board where it was like, man, it would be really nice. Graham Barton was still on the board at that point. Nate Wiggins, Terrion Arnold as well. Again, I'm good with the Fautanu pick, but those 2 off the top, Brian Thomas and then Quinyon Mitchell, it's like, man, I'm of the thought process, though. The Steelers' offensive line has not been right the last several seasons. You mentioned
Agreed.
It earlier, Chris, where you're like, why do you spend a 1st-round pick on Najee Harris? That's coming down from the top from Art Rooney II, saying, hey, we're never going to finish last in the NFL in rushing ever again.
Right.
And I know you were coming off a season where James Conner was hurt, but that's why you draft Najee Harris in the 1st round several years ago. But to me, it's like the Steelers are finally getting their offensive line right. And with Broderick Jones and then the 2 rookies that they have coming in, and I don't want to discount anyone else on the roster, but you have 3 potential dudes up front, just absolute maulers at the line of scrimmage. I think I filled enough time. Was there anyone else that you liked at 20, though, when the Steelers had their 1st-round pick, Chris?
So my big board, the top player available left, I believe, was Quinyon Mitchell, because I valued him and Terrion Arnold as the top 2 cornerbacks in this draft class. And if you could get a top corner, if you could get 2 pillar cornerbacks, like one of those guys and Joey Porter Jr., that would have been awesome. But like you said, offensive line was such a huge need. This team wants to get back to controlling the line of scrimmage. Troy Fautanu makes a ton of sense right there. So I loved Troy Fautanu going at the pick. I had him as my 14th best player overall. You got him 20th overall. So that's extremely great value. And then you got even better value with Zach Frazier at 51st overall. I had him as my 29th player. Mark, I looked at him as like, this guy, he can be a dominant center in the NFL. Maybe not a Hall of Fame caliber guy, but maybe more like a Jeff Hardings. Like if you think back to what he did for the mid-2000s Steelers when they picked him up, I think he can be a guy that stabilizes the middle of the line, plays very well, and everything moves can kind of like, base off of him being able to shut down the interior gap. One thing that he does very well is he anchors himself so well so that he doesn't get blown back by bigger defensive tackles. In fact, I think that's where he does really well is when he's going up against a big dude in the middle, he stymies him and pushes him back or moves him out the hole. That was even a weakness to Maurkice Pouncey, who he was great at pulling and hitting in space. He was great at handling, undersized guys or quicker guys. But if you had those big, massive, overwhelming defensive tackles, those are the guys that sometimes Pouncey would struggle with, like Brandon Williams with the Ravens. And that's where I think Zach Frazier won't struggle with. And meanwhile, that allows, if he's able to just do that job, Polamalu, Daniels, Jones, and Fautanu, all those guys can pull, can hit, and are athletic enough to move around in space. You can do so much with that, and I think that's why it was huge for them to get the first 2 picks offensive line. And now, so long as no injuries happen, so long as these guys work out as they're supposed to, this is a position you don't really have to address with your first round pick for years, the way they didn't have to when they picked Pouncey into Castro. So I think that's certainly the route to go there. Sure, you could have gotten, one of those top corners. Brian Thomas was 24th on my board, still a really good wide receiver. I also really liked Adonai Mitchell. He was also there in the second round.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how that will go with Indianapolis because I really liked him coming out of the draft class. But offensive line, you had to address tackle and center in my book in this class. They got both, and to me, they got 2 of the top at each position there. Can't argue with that.
Hey, and you cover Pitt athletics, Chris. So the people who follow you know a little something about the backyard brawl.
Absolutely.
Zach Frazier, you pop on the tape in that game, in his dominance at the line of scrimmage, and what stands out to me is the violent hands, where you talk about oncoming defensive tackles, nose tackles. You could say it's the wrestling background, but just manhandling other massive humans. And look, this is something the Steelers have struggled with since Maurkice Pouncey retired 3 years ago. It's the center position. It was Kendrick Green. That did not work. Mason Cole was all right in 2022. Way too inconsistent last year. And what's going to blow up your offense from the jump, and it's A-gap, B-gap responsibility. Fastest point from one to another is a straight line. If you don't have a stout interior, we can talk about Russell Wilson and Justin Fields and in previous season, Kenny Pickett's development. None of that matters if you don't have a stout interior.
I agree. It's all about protecting the interior of your line. And listen, center, like we talked about positional value, center is not as high of a value position as tackle is in today's NFL, but it's so important, especially when you're going up against great interior pass rushers. And that's something that you'll face it. Like, let's say the Steelers in the next couple of years, they develop into a Super Bowl contending team. Guess who they're going to be going up against? The Kansas City Chiefs. Guess what the Kansas City Chiefs have? One of the best interior rushers in the NFL, maybe the best now that Aaron Donald has retired in Chris Jones. And there's teams finding new ones every year. In fact, you talked about the backyard brawl. One first-round pick last year was Kalijah Kancey, who had a phenomenal year for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Not that the Buccaneers are a Super Bowl threat, but more and more players like that are coming out into the NFL, and you have to be ready to get the guys to handle that, to not only protect your edges, but protect your interior. Zach Frazier, and listen, part of what built the Steelers' great offensive line of the 2010s was having 3 anchor players: Maurkice Pouncey, David DeCastro, and Marcus Gilbert. Gilbert got injured too early in his career for everyone to see how he completely shaped out, but he was a phenomenal tackle for the Steelers. Like, if you looked at the games he did and didn't play, there were some night and day differences in how they could run the ball. He was a big factor in that. And when he kind of went away, they still were one of the best offensive lines. But if he was healthy, like back in like 2014, 2015, I think that was 2015 might have been his last year where he was completely healthy. If he was healthy beyond that, like they might have continued to develop as like the best run blocking offensive line in the NFL. Now you have 3 anchors again in Frazier, Fautanu, and Jones. You hope that none of them go through an early career-ending injury that like Marcus Gilbert did. And if you get that, like you're back to being the run dominant team that doesn't put too much on their quarterback. And let's face it, that's the last time this Steelers team won a playoff game. Like everyone talks about the playoff drought that they're suffering right now, but the last time they won a playoff game, it was on the road at Kansas City, where they beat Andy Reid, and the only time that he's ever lost a playoff game while having a bye at home. And I mean, and that's in his entire career from the Chiefs to the Eagles. that was an amazing job by them then. And what did they do in that game? They ran the football. Le'Veon Bell dominated, and Chris Boswell knocked through field goals, while the passing game with Ben Roethlisberger just wasn't there that game. You look back to the week before, the Dolphins, Le'Veon Bell destroyed that game. And that was the key in those games. And since then, they haven't had a dominant run game, and they haven't been able to win playoff games. I think there could be some correlation there. And I think the Steelers see like, hey, look, until we get the Patrick Mahomes, CJ Stroud, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, whatever, top quarterback you want to name, maybe the key is run the football well, have this balanced offense, and keep a great defense on the field. And then you can be a Super Bowl contender someday.
Yeah. Come January and hopefully February, the recipe's not all that complicated. It's a little bit of a different style of football later on in the season. I know we talked some about the receiver position. You mentioned a little bit about the cornerback position. What do you think is the biggest question mark facing the Steelers this season, and how do you see the team addressing it?
Well, we certainly have to see what the quarterback position plays out, right? Like, I think that the big thing is, can Russell Wilson be the guy? Can he be the guy that makes the big throw occasionally and avoids the big mistakes? So last year, you look at his touchdown to interception ratio, you take that for the Steelers. But here's the thing: Denver was dysfunctional. Denver had a lot of problems going on with them. You have a Steelers offense that you're making a new shape. Who knows what this offense is going to be like? Will it be dysfunctional? We don't know. Like, you could assume that by default, the offensive coordinator is going to be better. By default, the quarterback play is going to be better. By default, the offensive line play is going to be better. But will it all mesh? That's something that can be quite chaotic and go in a million different directions. And that's why I'm not sure if that's definitely going to happen. But what I do think is going to happen, I think you're going to see a leader in Russell Wilson kind of bring some steadiness to the offensive side of the room, and that might help everyone else settle into their roles. And if that one thing happens and Russ gives you good on the field play, doesn't have to be super electric, I think that might be the one thing that locks in the Steelers and makes it so that, hey, if you have just an offense that ranks in the teens, like the mid, like if you're 16th, 15th, even 14th in the NFL, you do any of those, even 17th, I think would be really good for where this team's, or 18th. But as long as you're in that middle of the pack with offense and you still have a top 10 defense like they have for the last 5 years in scoring, you're going to be one of the better teams in the NFL. They were 28th in scoring offense last year. Just go up 10 to 12 spots from that. And I think it changes everything. Heck, they were a playoff team last year that without TJ Watt, they were 2 touchdowns behind the Buffalo Bills. Give them a better offense and let them have their stars healthy for a playoff game. I think this team could compete for some serious contention next year.
I would think that it wouldn't be much worse than last season, the last several seasons. I say that knocking on wood, but then the next question I have too is like, at what point does Justin Fields play too? So like that to me is probably the biggest question going into this season is like, how long can Russell Wilson stave off Justin Fields? With the conditional pick going back to Chicago, there's no need to rush him on the field. I also think that in the event that either Wilson stinks or if he gets injured, I never bought into the rumors of, oh, Justin Fields is a kick returner. Not for lack of ability, but Cordero Patterson also isn't chopped liver either. He's one of the greatest return men in the history of the sport. So that to me is going to be fascinating of how they play that, because someone who's a 9-time Pro Bowler, someone who should be a 2-time Super Bowl champion in Russell Wilson, he's not going to start the season carrying a clipboard. But right. If and when you want to see what you got in Justin Fields, that dynamic of how the team handles all of that is going to be just fascinating to watch in the 2024 season.
Absolutely. I think that's it. The temperament of the room is going to be so important too, because, we're hearing guys say like, hey, the leadership's different right now. It just feels different when Russell Wilson's around than it did. And let's face it, Kenny Pickett had to prove stuff, when he was with the Steelers. He had to prove he was going to be the man. And there's a lot of pressure of that, especially when there's 2 other guys that are trying to figure out their path in the NFL. No one has to prove if Russell Wilson's the man. That guy's won a Super Bowl. That guy's been a 9-time Pro Bowler. He may be in the Hall of Fame someday. So like, Russell Wilson doesn't have to prove as much. He just has to come in and do his job. He doesn't have to show that he fits into the NFL. Justin Fields, I think, is a guy that he's like, hey, you know what? I just want to show people that I still have it, but I don't need to necessarily press right now. I just need to keep improving my craft, and then maybe I'll get my shot here. So I think that this has a potential to reset the leadership, and something that I talked about with Ryan Shazier a few weeks ago. In fact, right before the draft for the North Shore Drive podcast with the Pittsburgh Post Gazette. He was talking about how on the defensive side of the ball, from before he was there to after since he's been there has been a steady transition of leadership. You had Casey Hampton and James Farrier and Troy Polamalu and James Harrison. And then, Lawrence Timmons came into the picture, then Cam Hayward, then Ryan Shazier, then TJ Watt, then Minka Fitzpatrick. There's just a steady, succession plan of leadership. That wasn't there on offense, particularly because their offensive leadership, if you think back to the last time this team won playoff games, it was Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro. Well, Antonio Brown abruptly left. Le'Veon Bell just didn't want to play because he wanted a better contract. Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro both had to retire early because of injury problems. And Ben Roethlisberger, had his shoulder messed up and then came back and played 2 years. That is a sudden exodus of leadership, and they didn't get anybody in there who could develop. Like they couldn't invest in the offensive line while they were fixing other positions. They were hoping Kenny Pickett could be the leader, but he never got to learn from Ben Roethlisberger what it was like to be a leader for the organization. There was no succession plan because running back because Le'Veon Bell left, and they just had to kind of deal with it. Wide receiver wise, Antonio Brown, I mean, you kind of don't want someone to learn under Antonio Brown with how crazy he got. But, him, Juju Smith-Schuster, all those guys, they were gone. So everything was uprooted for the offense. And I think that one of the underlying things that will happen this season that won't get talked about, the intangible things off the field, are just how does that culture reset itself in the offensive room of the Steelers? Keep an eye on stuff like that.
Yeah, that's why I love the Patrick Queen signing, because it's a position that they haven't gotten right since Shazier, Chris. And you mentioned Shazier as well. 10 years ago today, we're recording this Wednesday, May the 8th. 10 years ago today, the Steelers drafted him in the first round. And it's like how we would remember history differently if not for his injury. I got two things before I let you go here, and we'll go really quickly. You could go current Steeler, former Steeler. I'd go former Steeler. We just had the Tom Brady roast. My pick would be Terry Bradshaw. I think he would take it in the right way. I think that there's so much that you could do with him, with his history with the Steelers, with what he's done on Fox. He's been an actor, a lot of different worlds he's operated in, even post-playing career. He would be my pick. Which Steeler would be at the top of your list to get roasted, a la Tom Brady on Netflix earlier this week?
I feel like Terry Bradshaw is a very great pick by you because he's a guy with, like you said, he's been in movies, he's been in pop culture, he's been, and he's also the lovable guy. He makes fun of himself, the jokes would write themselves there. But two people that come to mind, and the two people I've actually named in this episode. One would be James Harrison, but I think it'd be funny to make fun of James Harrison simply because, I think that there would be some jokes that he would be like, "What you say?" and people are like, "Oh, James, I'm just playing, man. It's just a roast, James, not serious." I think that would actually add to the jokes and people being like, "Please don't kill me." But then the other guy I think would be really funny because it would be the complete opposite. Would be Troy Polamalu. I mean, listen, Troy was one of the nicest people in the world that it feels like you could not. Like people who make fun of him, you'd be doing so. You'd make fun of his hair commercials. You'd make fun of how and we've heard so many little inside stories. I would love to hear from guys like a guy that you work with a lot, Ike Taylor. I would love to hear from guys who were just around Troy Polamalu about all the different times they were just like, is this guy for real? Is he really this nice all the time? I feel like that would be a really fun roast. I feel like that would also be maybe a little bit too wholesome, but those would be two of my recent Steelers guys. An obvious pick would be Ben Roethlisberger.
Sure.
But with some of the allegations that happened in his career, I feel like that he might be like, you know what? I'm okay not doing that because I don't need anybody cracking those jokes. I'm retired. I'm going to the Hall of Fame someday. So if I had to pick two, Polamalu and Harrison.
Good choices there. And Harrison with the visor too. It's like they had a clip, I think it was on Travis Kelce's show where where James Harrison hit him at some point and just absolutely cleaned his clock. And it was just that is a guy where you look at some of his workout videos on Instagram and I'm like, I'm not sure he's human.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he would go to the hottest places in the country and train at insane rates because he was just trying to, that was his normal thing. And guys would go with him, like Vince Williams would talk about trading with him and stuff like that. That's just nuts to me, man. Like I feel like James Harris, and the thing is, he still stays in shape. Like you could see him around in Pittsburgh, just hanging out at places, going to events and stuff. And you're like, how are you still this big? Another guy like that is Jason Gilden. He's also ridiculously built.
Yes,
but again, just like James Harrison, he has enough crazy stories. And James Harrison also, I think, is open to joking about himself. Like, he's also been on TV now. He's also had like not the 30 for 30, but the football life documentary. So like, I feel like he'd be open to it a little bit there. But yeah, I'd like to go there. Another person, I think I would like to see this for how chaotic would be. But what if there was a roast for Antonio Brown? Like, think about that, Mark. Like, how crazy would he get when someone makes the wrong joke about him? Man. Like, I just think that could be premier TV because Tom Brady can take stuff on the chin, and he's like, "Look, I'm Tom Brady. I'm rich forever. I won all these Super Bowls. I don't care what you guys think of me." But Antonio Brown, not that it would be safe or sanitary or family viewing, but I think that would be the biggest fireworks you could probably get in a former Steelers roast.
If you could be totally truthful, where you give everyone truth serum as well, I would love to see one other guy I'll throw in there.
Okay.
After his coaching career is done, Mike Tomlin, I think, would just be it'd be incredible. It'd be incredible.
The amount of Tomlinisms people would employ would just be so good. I agree. Whenever that finishes, Mike Tomlin needs to be roasted. There's people that roast him every day in Pittsburgh. I think like those people can chill, but I'm talking about from players who loved him, who worked with him.
Yes.
And just like they would tell the funniest stories about how much he was like a dad, or sometimes like there's times that we've heard from Mike Tomlin about when Najee Harris spent like Christmas, Thanksgiving at his place, and like he gets to tell how like Najee Harris got a little tipsy one night. Like I'd like to hear those stories about Mike Tomlin whenever they've just been hanging around and we haven't heard about the time that Mike Tomlin maybe did something a little over the top. So like that would be another fun one for sure.
Yeah, you talk about appointment television. Don't blink, Chris Carter. All right, last question for you.
Sure.
The schedule releases next week. Let me go through the opponents at home and on the road, and I'll just have you. We're going to take it out of the division. We know the division opponents. The Ravens matchup's always electric. But at home, the Steelers will also play the Cowboys, the Chiefs, the Chargers, the Giants, and the Jets. And then on the road, the Falcons, the Broncos, the Colts, the Raiders, the Eagles, and Commanders. To me, just looking at this list, a matchup against the Broncos, if Russell Wilson's still playing at that point in the season,
huge,
sticks out to me. We don't know the exact dates until next week, but of all of those matchups, which sticks out to you, Christopher Carter?
Well, one, I look at being at the Eagles, and particularly because the Steelers have not won in Philadelphia since like the 60s. Like it's been a very long time. The Eagles, they won at Three River Stadium, but they have not won at Heinz Field / Acrisure Stadium since that stadium was built. So that cross-state rivalry, it's not a rivalry. They're in different conferences. They only play like once every 4 years or so, but that connection there, no team has won in either stadium in a very long time since you and I were children. So like that's good. That looks interesting to me. The Broncos, with certainly the Russell Wilson return there, look interesting to me. I'm interested to see also, like, they play the Chiefs and the Chargers at home. What's that going to look like with two of the biggest big name quarterbacks in Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert going up against them? Also, so they're going to face them, but also new coaches. The Falcons have a new coach. The Chargers have Jim Harbaugh there. The Colts have a young coach. The Raiders have a new coach. The Commanders have a new coach. There's lots of new coaches they'll be facing, and that could be really interesting. But my thing, if I'm going to look at the big thing here, is the Steelers are going to play a lot of top of the line quarterbacks next year. You got Patrick Mahomes, you got Justin Herbert, you got Aaron Rodgers, and then of course you just naturally have Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow. So those are going to be there. Kirk Cousins, if he starting for the Falcons, that's where that is. And then you still get young quarterbacks like Anthony Richardson who should be there. Jalen Hurts is on the schedule. Jaden Daniels is on the schedule. There's a lot of big name quarterbacks. Bo Nix is going to be on the schedule. There's a lot of big name quarterbacks and a lot of young quarterbacks, and that's where I'm going to be really interested to see how do the Steelers face off against all those different guys, because that can be an interesting meshing of how they play. But again, if they have a balanced offense and a top 10 defense again this year, I think it could put them right in contention with a lot of those teams.
I could talk to you till sundown about all of this, Christopher Carter.
Absolutely.
But I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time and get you out of here. If there's anything that you need to plug over with your coverage with Locked On Steelers over at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, The floor is yours, my friend. Please plug anything that you need to, and thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you. And you can find my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. I cover all things Pitt there. I dabble in some Steelers as well. I also do the North Shore Drive podcast for them every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, where we talk all things Pittsburgh sports. You want to know when Paul Skeens is coming up for the Pirates? We talked about that on Wednesday with Noah Hiles, who's giving you the cookie crumbs to when it's actually going to happen and how it's going to happen. But also, we also do the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. Same way you get all your podcasts, like Bleav in Steelers, audio platforms, YouTube, all of those different places. Mark, thanks so much for having me here, man. These are just easy, fun conversations that we have. These are really nice.
I could keep going. I appreciate the kind words, my friend. And I'm pretty sure that they figured out a way to clone you in the 412.
Hey, we wear all the hats, baby. We wear all, because that doesn't even deal with what I did with Channel 11 when it gets to football season. So it's a lot of fun.
Thank you to our guest, Christopher Carter. My name is Mark Bergin. This has been another edition of Bleav in Steelers. Thank you to today's presenting sponsors, BetOnline and Melin Hats. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave us a 5-star review. And on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We will see you next week here on Bleav in Steelers with the scheduled release May 15th. So get ready for that. Keep it here on this channel then. I'll see you next time. Take care. So long, everybody.